Okay.
Oh. You know when you lean back on your cheap crappy chair a little bit.
Hey, I didn't choose to grow this.
Pressing numpad another time.
Why are you playing it if you're bitching about it?
Hey, you kicked the ball over, now you get it.
You're right.
Fucking broke me legs, mate.
Simple question, didn't expect it. What a glorious motherfucker.
Look at our body.
Glorious.
No, it wasn't glorious.
Listen, I carried your asses!
You came top, congratulations.
Hello there everyone, and welcome to Live Gaming Gathering, where we gather to talk about games, life, entertainment, anything we find interesting or interesting to discuss. And I'm Tom, also known as TheLankySoldier, and this is episode 3 of our brand new podcast where we already described, talk about stuff. And today I'm joined by the real Battlefield game changers, the people that left a big impact on everyone, even though you probably not realize it, whether you're a player or a developer. I'm joined today by Dark Ethereal, who are already featured on episode 1. Say hello.
Hello.
Wow, that's enthusiastic as fuck. That is enthusiastic as hell. And a brand new guest, Spitfire, but we call him Szymon.
Yep, good day. Don't try to speak my full name because it's not gonna work anyway.
SpitfireSiemion.
Close enough.
Yeah, I'm getting there.
Please don't do that.
Never again. Spitfire and Szymon is best. Alright, also, I want to say, because Spitfire is on this podcast, well, brand new podcast for the first time ever, I want to bring you back in Battlefield 1 podcast days, when we're doing the Battlefield podcast, and we never brought you there, I don't know why, for 42 episodes.
Yes, it already started in BF4. I think I just didn't really have anything particularly interesting to say besides the handlers.
Okay, so for anyone that doesn't know, Szymon is number 2 now in the world that has the most flare kills in Battlefield 4. And you were competing with some guy, I don't know where from, I can't remember his name.
Hilarious.
Yes,
German.
that's the name.
He got 3,000, I believe.
I just want to ask, how the hell you have the patience to get 2,000, 3,000 flare kills in Battlefield 4?
You know, the thing is, it's kind of a factor of a challenge because those, even if people have absolutely no idea what's coming for them, it still isn't very straightforward because, first of all, to really set up an effective trap, you needed to get some points to upgrade your squad perk level, which took a while because you needed to get to level 3 to be at full capacity. And the thing is, when you set all the explosives up from start to end, it's going to be like 15 to 20 seconds. It kind of depends on the setup. And you need complete peace and quiet in that period, but at the same time, it still has to be an area that sees enough combat, because otherwise you're just going to be standing, looking, and doing nothing. Well, at least in the way I use them, because Hilarious used the aggressive flares. But for my playstyle, which was more trap-based, you just had to find that mix of, I would say, calculated risk, which more often than not, it still doesn't work. It's just the challenge that keeps on giving, really. I guess that's all there is to it.
I love that there's like some sort of like meta here, getting kills with a non-killing object in the game.
Yeah, that's actually pretty ridiculous, because I was talking with Hilarious, and we have styles that are just complete polar opposites. He would usually go for that aggressive style where he would just sneak up on more passive players, translate to usually snipers, although he also got a pretty decent number of tanks. So he would just actively chase those kills. Well, in my case, it was more finding a high traffic area and just waiting for someone to walk into it, which, well, I guess it works a little bit more often, but it takes way more time to get the kills. On the plus side, it has more potential for multi-kills, although it's not something you should really rely on too much.
How we met on Battlefield CTE, right? Or Skype. We met through Dark's BXP Skype channel.
Yeah. It was back in Skype days.
Yeah, oh my god, the Skype days. We were talking about it back in the episode 1 about, and we had like, what, 150 people, something like that, and it's just, that chat was never quiet. But yeah, I think we met through that, and then somehow we transferred to Discord? Or
No, Slack.
Oh, it was
was
Slack. I completely forgot about Slack.
Because
Completely.
the way it started with, obviously Dark has better picture, but many people in the beginning, myself included, that's I think the only detail I remember with 100% certainty, was because there was a post on old Battlefield forums basically encouraging people to join to that, and there was a decent number of people, thankfully fairly sensible people, which if you were on the old forums, you know it wasn't always a given, that joined, and it kind of worked out, I guess.
As you say, the old forums, I just remembered, and like you said, Dark is inviting everyone to join. I just remembered. Do you remember the badge he used to share with every post he did?
No.
The BXP chat logo.
Yeah, I remember.
That's how I remember the forum field forums, with just Dark with his BXP badge going everywhere, posting everywhere.
I mostly remember the forums because of the off-topic section, which I think I can probably say I'm probably one of approximately 3 to 4 people who are very active in the off-topic chat and somehow never managed to get banned.
Battlefield forums back in the day were quite something on Battlelog. They were like quite something.
I remember I used to get so wound up, and I can't remember
There were so many things we got wound up
There was
about.
so much.
Yeah, there was so many things.
Good time.
You guys met through Battlelog, I guess, because Dark was inviting everyone to join.
Yeah. That would be it.
Okay, because I called you both of you the real game changers. I know Dark created BXP chat, basically created a small group of players that were passionate about Battlefield and helped DICE as much as they could with the development of BF4 and everything like that. Can you explain your role, what you did in CTE or BXP, why I think that you're one of the real game changers out there?
Oh, me?
Both of you.
Simon, would you like to go first?
Okay, I can go first. Well, in my case, my role is a stretch, but it all started with BF Tracker, the community bug tracker that Red Spider created. It was even before BFXP days, but it was in BF4 already. We kind of connected, kind of by accident, because if you know me, you know I like to write a lot. Long pieces of text.
You're just like Dark. Yeah.
Hey.
I think I might be even worse. But basically what happened was that I wrote the list of just every bug that I remembered at the point, and I just posted that on the forums. Obviously, nobody read that. But because they just saw the size, are like, nah, I'm not doing that. But Spider, who was a moderator on the forum back then, he invited me to just kind of help out with reporting bugs on the tracker. Back then, it was more than we would just report bugs. It wasn't really a public thing. But when CTE came up, it I would say got transferred to a more public role where people would actually start reporting bugs for the CTE in the bug tracker. And what I would do would be, primarily at that point reviewing whether the bug was reported properly and if it isn't a duplicate of something that got reported. Because, obviously, people don't really know how QA really works, so they wouldn't have an idea that if something is already reported, you just ping it in there instead of posting a new one. Obviously no one should be blamed for not knowing that, but still it had to be kept under some kind of supervision, because otherwise it would just devolve into a complete mess. So that's what I would primarily do. Over time, in BF1 I also started verifying, trying to reproduce bugs a bit more, but yeah, what I said was the primary role. And honestly, in BF4, really the only one, because I had a laptop back then. It wasn't a very good laptop. So while it just about barely could run BF4 in Minecraft quality at about 20 frames per second, CT was a bit too much for it. So all I could do was really, I guess you could call it infrastructural help, plus just talking and pretending that I know what I'm talking about. I guess that would be it, basically.
You can just do a quick about yourself, Dark.
Well, yeah. So, yeah, as I kind of got into last episode, basically when CTE started up, I had contact with a developer, and we just started this thing where we started a chat where some people with the ability to give good feedback could communicate with developers, and it just sort of grew from there because I had a strong sense things should be sort of opened up as widely as possible and not kept to a small group of players. The thing is, a game like Battlefield is shared between all sorts of different kinds of players, and if you just stick to a few, you can't just stick to the infantry players. Make a game that's not for tank players. You can't just stick to any particular group. So I felt that things had to be opened up more widely, and I was wanting to get more people involved in that sort of thing. And I think that's what we did. And yeah, when CT started up, I would post on the forums what was going on in the CTE, and we organised get-togethers in the CT, in the Battlefield 4 CTE, to get people playing and looking for specific issues and testing specific things, whatever was being tested that week or month, and yeah, just sort of maintain the social aspect of testing, I suppose.
Which I want to kind of segue to that. So because CTE is not available in Battlefield 5, we're gonna talk mostly about Battlefield 5 right now.
Okay.
Because CTE is not available in Battlefield 5, would you think that Battlefield 5 would benefit from CTE at this moment right now? Let's say, as we're recording right now, this is gonna be December 2019. Would you think it would benefit if DICE dropped CTE, let's say January or February? Would you think the game would benefit from CTE itself?
It is hard for me to say because you can't just sort of create a CT and drop it in there and just have everything sort of work out. If developers aren't interested in it and developers' plans aren't based around it, if CT just sort of turns into a thing where developers drop whatever content they are planning to release a month early and get it tested, then it might have an effect on sort of community engagement, i.e. YouTubers getting to make videos about things before they come out. But I don't know whether it'll actually improve the game. Like, you have to be committed to improving the game based on player feedback. And the thing is, I remember when, like, players can be full of shit, right? But, yeah. In Battlefield 4, in the CT, developers would do things to sort of figure out whether players could actually whether players are actually being honest. And sometimes it's hard to be honest because you can think that something's happening and something isn't happening. I remember they would do tests on stuff like netcode, and they would say, right, we've changed the netcode. Tell us whether you think it's better or worse. And people would say, some people would say, it's awful. And other people would say, yeah, this is better than it's. They may have not actually changed anything that week. I'm pretty sure there were times when they'd actually do that. And they'd run servers where you wouldn't know whether they'd done anything, whether that thing that they had done was meant to make things better or worse. And basically, they did this, and players would think that things are happening, even when they aren't. So it was always, when it was easy for players to criticize the process, especially people would criticize what CT players sort of thought, and I think just because they weren't involved in the process. But the thing is, the process was basically open to any PC. Eventually, it was open to any PC player who wanted to join CT. But it was just a matter of you could go out of your way and choose to participate or not, and some people didn't, yet still chose to criticize, which was sucky. Don't do that.
Yeah, you actually brought up something that I kind of wanted to bring up too, which is people in general, like right now, treat CT like it would be a magic panacea for everything that they think is wrong with the game. And at the same time, but it definitely would have some value Exactly how much it's difficult to say because obviously we wouldn't really know that much about the infrastructure behind it. And also, the players kind of are capable of making stuff up slightly. Let's be honest, placebo and bias are some serious drugs.
Yes.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, like the CTE kind of became, I have a feeling right now, that kind of a buzzword for it's just going to magically fix anything. It would have fixed everything if it was there. But at the same time, when you look at Battlefield 4 and 1, so many people shouting that never actually bloody bothered to even care about it when it actually existed. I mean, when you look at that, for some tests, it was just completely impossible to really gather enough people to make what you would consider a representative sample, because most of people that did care, and there weren't that many, were in it for basically early access. I mean, sure, there was a group of people who actually cared, who wanted to make the game better, but compared to what would be really optimal, it just wasn't that much. And the difference is, unfortunately, I know it sounds like I'm basically blaming the community, but if more people who'd said they care actually cared, it definitely would have been way better off.
Yeah, you're not wrong though, because you mentioned that some people treat it as early access. Well, BF4 was kind of that, but at the same time, no, because usually developers picked a random map that is not new and just like, hey, play this. And whatever the changes are, netcode or new weapon or whatever, like some sort of changes that not that noticeable to a casual player to begin with. BF1 though, BF1 was quite the opposite. It was literally early access, because the biggest patches we ever got on BF1 CTE was literally content drops to test the maps. Like, oh, it doesn't crash. Okay, cool. Release it on retail in a month.
Yeah, and that at the same time where there would be patches that actually were primarily about fixing stuff. It was difficult to fill a server. That's on PC. That's how bad it would get. People would just not give a damn. Even in cases where it actually led to the bugs that would be hilarious. I don't know if you remember in Battlefield 1, the General Liu and the grenade.
Oh, that brings a lot of memories, yeah.
Fully automatic grenade launcher rounds.
Yep.
I think that were maybe like on PC like 60 people who did show up, maybe total. That would be about it.
The reason I like CTE, or at least I have fond memories of CTE, yes, there was always some people that just want to bitch about something, right? Whatever the case is. But the way I remember CTE, it could be because we were in our own little bubble, maybe that could be it. That could be a big factor why I'm thinking fondly of CTE. But CTE for me was always about interaction and literally meeting new people, and wherever you see them in the forums or in the game or on Skype or Slack, whatever, you recognize that person, like, hey, what's up, how you doing, or something like that, and you talk about the changes or something like that. BF1 wasn't really that, sadly, because like I said, it was early access content drop a month before the game drops on the retail, and that's how I made the bloody trailers, thanks to Battlefield CTE.
I mean, yeah, I guess there was more interaction in BF4 CTE, but also in BF1, I think what made at least the perspective on me and you a bit more different is that in BF1, we also saw it from the moderation side, which, let's be honest, it wasn't always pretty.
Yeah, it wasn't pretty, yeah.
And I mean, you have to have a certain amount of distance when you're doing the moderation, because otherwise it's just going to bite you back at some point on a mental level, because more often than not, you're basically just the proxy for people who are annoyed to just release their rage.
There's a reason why Battlefield forums exist in the first place. They need a space where to rant about something. And Battlefield forums are just there. Just the reason, like, don't get me wrong, Balog forums were never perfect. Sometimes they were pure cancer, but sometimes they were really amazing. But when it's pure cancer, people do need some sort of space to vent their emotions out, no matter how it can be nasty sometimes. But they need a space. I think that's how that works with everything. People need space to rant out some way. So that's why I never took Battlefield forums, the current ones, any seriously, because majority of the feedback is just not that important or good, or it just runs with no context.
I mean, frankly, a lot of stuff that now I'm looking at the Battlefield forum, it's even difficult to really classify it as feedback, although I guess it depends on your definition, because a lot of it is just basically talking smack about the developers, because it's more like someone has to be smack talked, and it's something that always pretty much always happens, no matter if the changes that happen are good or bad. It's always going to happen. There's always going to be that scapegoat somewhere. I mean, for example, if you remember BF4 CTE, then the CTE regulars, for example, were also a very popular target of flack.
Oh yeah,
from the rest of people, which is something Dark also kind of brought up. It's always going to happen, unfortunately, and unfortunately, you always also need people who will be on the front line to at least keep it within what I guess you could call respectable level.
Yeah, and as you say that, on the first episode, we were talking about, I mentioned game changers, because people on Reddit right now complaining that game changers have influence on game design decisions, and I said that's never was the case, because game changers don't have that kind of power, because game changers themselves are in their own echo chamber. That means nothing in the in the bigger picture, because at the end of the day, DICE is making the decisions, and it's their game, and that's what they do. And you was mentioned scapegoats. So back in the day, they were looking for scapegoats to like the moderators or the regulars on the CT, and because we don't have CT these days with Battlefield 5 on Reddit, and the 5.2 changes that came up, the TK changes and all that kind of stuff, people right now complaining about game changers, because certain game changers apparently have such influence on people, they think they're the ones calling the shots and DICE just listen to them, which is again not the case.
Which is completely off. I mean, yeah, there is some impact. I mean, yeah, the devs take feedback from them in those sessions that happen, but it's feedback. It's not decision making. And I mean, as I said 1,000 times, nobody's feedback is going to be perfect. Sure, there are going to be some things that pop up then that it's like, yeah, fair enough. Well done catching it. But at the same time, there's always going to be some bias. And this is something I also thought of a couple of days ago. In general, it's not even as the Battlefield community, I would even say it's not as an internet community, but we always have the tendency to overestimate. We overestimate our impact, we overestimate what we think we know. I mean, for example, based on Bug Tracker, I thought I knew a bit, like not much, but I knew a bit about like the quality verification process in the video games. And then I went to Madrid for localization, and suddenly I noticed I did not know shit.
It's like, yeah, people need to play escape, and that's annoying. Like, and before people were saying, oh, we define game changes or something like that, keep in mind, we are the game changers. Like, me and Szymon are part of the game changer program. And
former. I'm former.
Oh, yeah, because you,
part of it when I started working for EA Madrid.
Correct. And I'm still active, I guess, but I'm not that active there anymore, because the way I say, game changers, their own separate bubble from Reddit or Twitter. Well, maybe Twitter combines them together into one, but game changers and Reddit are completely separate bubbles. They live their own echo chamber, and DICE do their own thing, because that's their game, and they're the ones make the decision. But of course, game changers want to blame Reddit, and Reddit wants to blame game changers. It's a never-ending fight that no one can win, and it's pointless. And I'm telling you, as a game changer, I agreed with Reddit on certain points, and I agree with certain points that game changers say, and I disagree with some points that Reddit says, and some points that the game changers say. it's never separate. It's always together, all mixed up. It's just people pick sides for no reason that may have no impact on the game itself.
Yeah, and the problem is that tribal mentality, it actually kills off a lot of potential productivity. I mean, obviously, there always will be disagreements, but it's kind of reaching the point where you just, and I'm even starting to catch myself on it, and I just have to do my best consciously to avoid it, that sometimes you just catch yourself like, okay, that side said it, it's bullshit. Even though you didn't really completely dive into it, and if you actually try, once you actually try to, it might turn out that, hold on, they might actually have a point somewhere in there. That's the problem, and it's something that, okay, I know I'm going full old man Niels at the cloud here, but it feels like something that's getting worse and worse over time, really.
It's not only Battlefield though, I've noticed, it's Call of Duty too. Like, if you ask, okay, Call of Duty this year, when we think about Call of Duty, I think it's well-maintained video game at this point. Like when it released, sure there was some PC bugs, crashes or something like that. Okay, yeah, fine. But overall, it's still a well-maintained game, and people still find a reason to bitch about something.
Oh, I know, it's the same. I play a lot of 7 Days to Die, which, I mean, yeah, it's still enough after all those years, but it's actually turning out to be a pretty decent game. But in there, you also have to try which, to be fair, they pretty much always kind of clarify themselves in the survival games with multiplayer aspect, PvP versus PvE players. It's sometimes it's just a complete war. And the thing is, in matters like leveling up and such, some things that make sense for PvE, they will not be so fitting for PvP and vice versa. For example, I know it in that case, it was a very small group of people, but they were angry because the developers, the fun pimps, they introduced an option for the server to completely turn off any damage from player to player and from player to other players' stuff in the area protected by like a certain, like the land claim block. That's how it's called. And there was a small group of people who are angry about that, even though it's by no means it's not a mandatory option or anything, but the PvE servers obviously turned it on because it basically makes people immune against the griefers, which they're always going to happen. And a very small group of people from PvP actually took offense to that, which was, I mean, kind of weird because it did not really hurt them in any way unless they wanted to grief. But they still went at it.
It kind of describes what's happening in Division, because there's like always arguments in, for example, Division 2. There's like people want like PvE content or like something balanced around that, and some people want PvP to be balanced properly around that. Like there's always like a war between those two. But either way,
I mean, which is understandable.
Yeah. Going back on the Battlefield thing, if you were, let's say you work at DICE, right now. You just got a new job at DICE. You're the lead producer or something.
I wish.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's say,
not lead producer,
yeah.
but
Okay, well,
yeah.
You have to make the call. Do we bring CTE back to Battlefield 5 in the next upcoming months, and how you would do it personally?
Yeah, I'll give that one to Dark because I need to think over this one for a minute.
don't go into detail too much. That's like basic stuff.
Yeah, I think I would bring back CTE, just because I think in general it's a good idea to test things before you finalize them, and it's good feedback from the community, and not just go on developers feel, because players and developers, different people looking at things from different points of view. And I think that the player's point of view is perhaps one of the most valuable.
Fair enough. What you would say, Szymon?
Let me put it that way. If I had fairly unlimited amount of people and money, then I would have definitely gone for it, because in such a scenario, just for games health, it's definitely a benefit. But the problem is you would need to start kind of preparing the infrastructure for it in the back, and that's where the real challenge begins, because I mean, for going through what's going on in the city, you're going to need people for that, and obviously you're going to need money for that. You're going to need work power for that. Once city starts working, you would also need to activate, once again, you need to activate a number of people. Like, things have to go through CERT, thanks Sony and Microsoft. And that's just one of the examples. QA goes to work. So if, for example, you have QA people from DICE, you have EA Romania, you might have something from localization, and at that point you activate EA Madrid and also the other studio that focuses for the Asian languages. It just starts really spinning up and up in terms of number of people. And I mean, if you can afford that, then fair enough. But I'm guessing here. I'm guessing here because I've only seen a very small fraction of how things work, and from pretty much bottom of the ladder. But I don't think it's something you could do, like, particularly, like, you just snap your fingers and go.
No, it's not.
It would take time, and I guess with if I'm not mixing things up, if with next Battlefield not coming for the next year and a bit,
2021.
If they want to stick to the live service, which they obviously want to, then I guess there still would be even with those preparations, there still would be time to make it work. But at the same time, I know people are going to cringe at that, but it's still business. You have to ask yourself if at that point it's actually going to be worth it. In BF4, it turned out it was worth it. And to be fair, BF4 was kind of like a perfect storm for the creation of CTE. Yeah. Like, pretty much all the stars aligned for it to make it work. For BF1, I guess you could say it still worked, because it was based on what Dev said, it was pretty clear that the background work for creating it was just done enough in advance to really just not be constantly behind the play on the whole thing. In BF5, it could work, it might not work. It's honestly tough to say at this point. The thing is, we really don't know how well Battlefield 5 really did, how well is it doing on player counts and sales and such, because we never had player counts, and honestly, the thing is, even like those concurrent player counts, which were present in previous Battlefields when the BF4, BF1 stats sites were still up, they were decent, but even those are extremely misleading. So it's tough to guess, really.
The way just a quick note about how Battlefield 5 did in sales. When I was working at Sony and I was checking monthly data, what kind of games were sold and stuff, Battlefield 5 was always there in like the top 6 or 7 maybe every month. Sometimes it was higher because of sales, sometimes it was like a bit lower, but it was usually in the top 10 selling games every month. I mean, it kind of picked up steam as it went on. Regarding player counts, yeah, that's the thing. I don't know what kind of retention Battlefield 5 has. For me personally, Battlefield 5 doesn't have a big retention for me personally, because I just don't find Battlefield 5 that interesting or fun. Yeah, it's fun as a Battlefield game because it's still the same formula, Battlefield formula. But I don't play that much as I used to play, let's say, BF1, and I never really liked BF1.
Yeah, in my case, I think, like, okay, I would have to calculate it, but compared to where I was, like, on the hours played, I guess if we were talking base game, probably the order most to least would be, for me at the moment, BF1 and BF5 would be about even if I added CTE for BF1, because keep in mind, in BF1 CTE, I added like extra, I would say 500 hours to it, to what I played in base game. So BF1 to BF5, it would be about even. Then it would be BF4, and then there would be a pretty decent gap in BF3, and then a giant gap in Hardline.
I played Hardline for like what 25 hours I think, and that's it. I couldn't. I'm sorry. It's just.
I actually I went into 3-digit playtime on Hardline. I think I played like 140 hours or something, but it's actually weird when I think about it. It's not like I disliked anything in particular in that game. There was a number of things that I liked. Also, it's worth keeping in mind that at that point, it was pretty much the first Battlefield in this decade that had a smooth launch.
Yes.
Which people tend to forget, but one day also it's just meh. And I never picked it up again. I'm not even sure why, really.
It wasn't just... It felt wrong. It just didn't feel right. So many things,
just that feeling that something feels off, and you're even struggling to pinpoint what exactly.
Yeah,
and that is, as I said, despite the fact that I liked some stuff, like you could do weird shit in that game. I was like, you could do flashbang or whatever kills or whatever, or shoot EXO in the ass with a zipline, which I mean that was fun, but at the same time, just something felt awkward. It's tough to really pinpoint it, especially now.
And coming back quickly on this Battlefield for CTE, the way I personally do it, I will not have like a separate client for CTE, because at this point, was it last year, DICE proved with Battlefield 5 that they can have separate TTKs in the actual game. What certain servers were running different TTK, and the normal servers were running normal.
I don't remember.
Yeah, remember there was like a playlist different on Conquest or something like that back in December or something. They had like different.
Yeah.
They had different playlists, so you can. So they proved you can have different type of game under one client. So the way I would probably do it, it's not exactly being a different client for CTE, but it would be like a different playlist or something like that. It probably would not be part of the normal game. It will not probably track level. It will not track the rewards for the Tides of War crap. It will be a completely separate thing, just to join in, play, win the game, and that's it. There's no points, no nothing, no level up. It's just there to play.
I mean, yeah, it's an idea, although once again, the question is exactly how feasible would that be from point of view of once again, I'm going to repeat that whole going through third thing over and over again, because that's one of things that just come back to bite you in the ass over and over again, really. It's a question of exactly how feasible also it would be compared to making a separate client, how it would possibly maybe impact the irregularity of changes. And for example, I mean, keep that in mind. If we're talking public relations, people are not going to be very happy if you constantly force updates on them for stuff they're not going to use, which is exactly what's going to happen in that case. And depending on how it's executed, they might also have to just use up way more disk space for that, and just internet, which once again, keep in mind, for some people it's a limiting factor.
Yeah.
But so that might be a bit of a pitfall.
I will also, the way I would say, maybe, it won't be probably constant updates. If, let's say, if they will go that way, I would probably suggest make a special event. For example, that 5.2 patch that was dropped this month, that should be in CTE. So I wouldn't say no if they just dropped in a separate playlist. Play for a couple of days during the weekend. DICE can gather all the data during that time. And a month prior before the release, you can drop the patch according to people if there's any minimal changes they can make, if they want to drop that specific changes. I mean,
yeah,
it will be some sort of special event.
If that's technically possible, then yeah, I guess I would be up for it. Although, maybe he would disagree with that. I guess it would also put some people out of their quote unquote job. Also, it's not a job if there was some, once again, I have no clue if it's possible, if there was some kind of way to temper down the data mining.
Yes.
Because honestly, data mining, I would argue it's probably one of the main sources of harm for that game up till now.
Yeah, but I think the one reasons why people are interested in data mining right now is not because, new content. It's mainly because DICE really kind of dropped the ball with Battlefield 5 when it comes to like advertising content or making people excited. It doesn't matter if you enjoy Battlefield 5 or not. People are not that excited, and that's the problem. And the data mining is the only exciting thing that happens because they're looking forward to something.
Yeah. But at the same time, the problem with data mining is it creates expectations that more often than not, at least to some extent, have absolutely nothing to do with reality, because breaking news shit changes in development. It changes a lot. And then when they see that, okay, something was data mined, even though they completely ignore the fact that it's usually broken beyond all recognition at this point, they're like, okay, we expect the exact same thing, no matter how broken it is, how bad it is, just bring it on.
Yeah, but DICE really need to improve the communication, though. If you ask me, they dropped like what, that 5.2. Yeah, game development is always in motion. Everything changes every day. But 5.2 changes were being made months prior, for sure. It's been in the works for months. And I'm kind of really disappointed they dropped the thread, for example, the announcement, what's going to be in 5.2 patch. Like, was it 2 weeks prior the update drops?
No, it was earlier. It started like a month and a bit before.
Okay, so it's like around the time when it was already about to get sent to certification. So that's already like pretty late, because if you're expecting feedback, that feedback is gonna be too late, because already
at the same time you have to ask yourself what good will be feedback based on something people literally did not see in the game. Actually, I would argue it's once again it's a take that's probably going to get me strangled, but I have a feeling 5.2 probably would have been better off if it actually got released completely without any warning, because within that month, basically people already made up their mind, and it became a total echo chamber. So I agree, 5.2 has some issues, although I still think it's better than it's made out to be.
I think it's a great update. But I'm with Reddit on this one. I'm really not a fan of TTK in general. Really not a fan. But that's me personally.
I can live with that, because honestly, with what balancing tools devs really have left, there wasn't much more they really could do, because the actual, in my opinion, best balancing tool for the weapons, which is spread, basically got shouted into oblivion.
Yeah, people really hate spread.
By people who had absolutely no clue what it is, more often than not.
Believe it or not, when people talk about balance, end of the day, spread is the answer, always was and always will be. Because people pretend it's like some sort of high-tech science about weapon balance. It's really not. And recoil, yeah, you can increase recoil, but recoil is still... You still can easily manage the recoil no matter how extreme it is.
I mean, yeah, recoil, it's only going to really work to a certain point, because with vertical recoil, I mean, still, a vertical recoil is, I wouldn't say 100%, but it's about 80-90% controllable, unless the variation in the spread, basically, unless the spread comes in, it's going to be pretty predictable. And with horizontal recoil, you basically reach the point, like, you have a point where it's barely noticeable and it's not really doing anything to you, unless you're firing on extremely long ranges, at which point, I mean, what's the point? And then you reach like from some point onwards, no matter how much you're going to increase horizontal recoil, it's not really going to matter because the weapon is going to be absolutely useless on range unless you tap fire it.
I mean, I never mind BF1 gunplay. Just like maybe needed a bit of change.
I actually really liked it.
It wasn't that bad, but
and actually, while I don't really like the low recoil system,
yeah,
because BF5 honestly is pretty low recoil on most of weapons, low horizontal recoil, importantly. The thing is, I like the gunplay, which really sets the weapons into the certain ranges, because that forces you to get some knowledge of the map. That forces you to just know your weapon, because the mistake that a lot of people make is they try to force a gun into their playstyle instead of building their playstyle around the gun,
that's a big problem.
Which is the right way to go,
mm-hmm.
and that's the big problem.
Yep.
And then if the balancing style that really puts the weapon in a certain range primarily comes in, and suddenly they just cannot use their weapon and the Swiss Army knife, then it's suddenly the fault of all those big bad deaths, because they actually have to think a bit before they fire a weapon.
All right. Speaking of, because we've been talking,
I'm going to get destroyed by people for all the stuff I'm saying here right now.
This is why this podcast exists. It's open-minded for everyone to listen and talk about anything that is on their mind. No one's here to judge anyone. If anyone wants to be a dipshit about something, don't be a dipshit. Please give constructive comments and feedback, whatever that is. This is a podcast to discuss stuff. That's all it is. If anyone dislikes it, I'm sorry. Just describe why you dislike it, so we can have a discussion. All right, we've been talking for 15 minutes. Do you want to talk about your experience while working at EA Spain? How you got the job and how it all went on, how it started, how all that kind of stuff? I mean, it's up to you.
I mean, yeah, I guess I can tell a bit.
Yeah, maybe it suggests people who want to work at EA or any other video game company, maybe they can get some tips from you.
I mean, yeah, the thing really with getting into game dev is keep in mind what I actually did during university had absolutely nothing to do with computer games. I have the MSc in plant biotechnology, which, as you can probably figure out, doesn't exactly have much to do with anything related to video games. I would say because, well, first of all, the way I found it was a coincidence, really, because basically I just saw on Twitter that EA was saying that they're starting to hire people for localization, and I kind of jumped on it. I had a couple of job applications to various places that did not work out before that. I tried it. What I really focused on was the stuff I did as a volunteer, because if you don't really have, I would say, I mean, yeah, first of all, university, like what you did at university, it's honestly a little bit overrated. But even that aside, you're probably going to have to depend on what you did as a volunteer. And yeah, I just built on that. I applied, and then the matter is localization. I mean, it's about language. It's both about your language and your understanding of English and the ability to juggle between both. So obviously your knowledge of English is going to get checked out. And yeah, I would say the primary thing is, I know it's very easy to say that, but just trust yourself, really trust the process, that you know the stuff. And for all that's holy, do not treat Google Translator as your main source of translation skills.
Someone actually used that.
I'm not going to say anything, but I mean, even if you went to school and had English, if you're young enough, where the Google Translator was already popular when you went to school, if you ever try to submit something to your teacher with Google Translator, then I would argue that the teacher would probably notice that within approximately 10 seconds.
10 seconds, you're being generous there.
Yeah, I guess 5. But the thing is, it's going to be obvious. It's not going to look pretty, because even the best available translators, like Deeply or however it's called, which is pretty good, but it's still going to be visible that no actual human being worked on that. And keep in mind, even if by some miracle you made it through, I don't know how, I don't know why. Maybe there was nobody else left in the world speaking your language, but the thing is, even if you make it through based on that, once you come to work, you're actually going to have to know that language. The translator is not going to save your bacon. And if you've ever played video games, the language used in video games can vary a lot. And a lot of it is stuff that to really convey it well, you need to know like the small things from your own language, from your own culture, also importantly. And if you don't know that, if you don't capitalize on that, or if you don't understand it from English, the translation, you will not notice is for example, the translation just comes through completely dead, which obviously can happen because the translator will usually not see the game in any shape or form. And you're not going to notice it, and then people will be upset that the translation is dead. So you just have to know that stuff. You have to feel it a bit. You do not have to have some kind of PhD from your language or from English or whatever, but you need to have good communicative skill in both languages. And I'm going to say why in a moment. But yeah, coming back to that, I went through the recruitment process, which took, I don't remember, but let's say about a month.
Yeah, my Sony think it was more than a month too.
Yeah, but like even from my experience with also my failed applications, usually start to, and like depending on company, also depending on circumstances, it's usually going to be month, maybe up to 2 months if you're really unlucky. So yeah, don't expect that you're going to move instantly, because you're not. There's going to be a little of a time gap between that, and then you have to sign your contract, and also keep in mind moving, depending on where you're moving, is not particularly easy. I mean, the problem with me in Spain is I don't speak Spanish.
Muchas gracias. That's all I know.
And the problem that is connected to that is not many people in Spain speak English. So yeah, you might actually have to rely on translator with that a bit. But in big cities, it might be a bit difficult to find accommodation. So that's something you'll probably need to sacrifice a few weeks for, because at least a couple of weeks. Just don't leave everything for the last moment, because it's going to bite you. And then you have to sort stuff out, like flight ticket, and suddenly it turns out that wait, you actually pretty much need a month and a bit to sort things out before you move, because otherwise you're just completely really messing yourself up. But yeah, after that, I mean, once I moved, I got assigned to what I'm doing, and if you look, I mean, it's not really something top secret. You can even see it from the credits. That usually the number of, I mean, obviously it depends on company, it depends on the game, but in my case, it was like 30-ish/40 people being in the group. And we had 3 people in language, so I had always had 2 people next to me. And yeah, that's something you have to keep in mind at all times. You're going to work as a group a lot, and you're not going to work as a group just within your language. You're going to jump between languages. But yeah, for that, I'll have to explain what localization really has to do with it, because
don't go into detail that much, because
no, I'm not going to go into detail, but you need to have at least a very basic idea of what localization does, because not many people know,
Yeah,
and
good
I
point,
don't
yeah,
really
good point.
blame them. I mean, I even know someone who thought that people from localization are the ones who actually like check the real life localizations for the maps for a video game. So yeah, basically, if you're in localization, your primary purpose as tester will be to check if the translation in the game, first of all, it makes sense in context of the game, because keep in mind, the translators will often translate like small bits. Like, for example, imagine the menu buttons. They will not know the context. They will not know the full context for what it's for. They will not, perhaps sometimes not really know that it's for the main menu. There might be a couple of ways to translate the same word from English, so they might get it wrong. It happens. Even if they get some information, it's not always going to be clear. So you check if the translation is correct from a language standpoint. You check if it holds up in the game, because here's the problem. English is a pretty short language.
It is actually funny enough.
Yeah, and the problem is, if something fits on the screen in English, it does not necessarily mean it's going to fit on the screen in Polish, or especially languages like Italian or French.
Ah.
Or, for example, for Arabic, there's an extra issue because Arabic goes in different direction.
Different direction.
And it also sometimes can cause issues. So you have to keep those things in mind. You have to check in the game if it's working. If it's not working, then depending on how exactly it's broken, you might have to bug it. You might have to report that there is a concern, that there is an issue, because, I mean, something might also be wrong in English, and that might cause the problem in Polish. In which case, you have to report that because you're not going to change English. You might, like, there's also other things, like, for example, broken special characters. Like, if you've ever played a video game and you've seen a box instead of a character somewhere, that's going to be that.
Yeah, that's true.
And also, which is probably the less fun part, you, for example, going to have to check if the error messages and such, and warning messages, if they actually are translated properly to your language. If the terms of service, for example, is updated the most recent form, because that's obviously legal. That is not allowed to be wrong by a single character.
Oof. So you've got to actually read the terms of service.
Okay, you're not going to read it 100% of the time, but at least a couple of things you should do is check if you actually have the most recent form of terms of service. And if nothing is broken inside it, like, at least check if the characters are not broken, because I cannot blame you that you don't want to read 30 pages of it every single time. But
every time they update in terms of service, you read the whole thing. Ooh.
Yeah, I don't remember who said that, but I think someone actually said that we're probably the only people in the world who actually read this stuff.
Pretty much. Oh god, that's hilarious.
Yeah, it's not hilarious when you have to read it.
Well, yeah, I can imagine it's annoying as hell. Like, oh my god, let me read this legal shit and translate it to a different language.
Okay, no, you're not translating it. You're getting it already in Polish.
Oh, okay.
You're just checking if it's actually the up-to-date Polish version. You're like, mate, if you think that you're allowed to change anything personally in the terms of service, boy, do I have the news for you. Do you seriously think that any company with a slightest bit of self-preservation instinct, would allow a random person, a random hired person, to just check whatever they want willy-nilly in their legal documents?
Well, I guess someone double check it anyway, I would imagine.
I'll put it that way. That's what legal is for.
Yeah. Usually that's the case.
But the key part either way is just communicate between each other within the language, because that's a good thing we had, because we had kind of people from different backgrounds. Like, for example, one person I worked with was a translator by by job, basically. So they were very good at catching stuff from language standpoint. But for example, I mean, I play video games, so sometimes I would not really catch something, and they would catch it. But at the same time, if they wanted to maybe overcorrect it, make it something that maybe will sound a bit off in a video game, then I would catch it. It's just different perspectives, really.
Yeah, which is actually amazing for everything, because it's, again, like this podcast, different perspectives are important because
it's I would even argue it's necessary.
Yeah, it's just
and
go on.
Yeah, and at the same time, there's also a matter of different languages, and it's not like Polish just completely doesn't speak to the Germans or something, because we do. We speak to everyone, because there are, for example, there will be some types of issues that are more likely to show up in certain language. Let's say Italian has a language that kind of tends to have long translations. So let's say the Italian team, they've noticed that a bit of text in the main menu, it just completely overlap with something else, whatever. So they would bring it up like, okay, guys, listen up. In Italian, something is messed up. You might want to check it for your language, especially language this, and that, because you usually also have long stuff. So yeah, check it out. And that's the basic of communication. And I can confidently say that it catches a lot of stuff that if you were closed in your own language bubble, you might possibly miss.
Yeah, because you get used to it and everything, so it's harder to notice something weird.
Yeah, pretty much. And also, yeah, with the special characters, obviously there will be a different group of languages, especially Arabic and Russian, where basically from the coding standpoint, basically everything is a special character. But it also impacts, for example, Polish or Swedish or French or whatever, even though we have different special characters. It's kind of an early warning system that is really good, and that's also why it's so critical for people just keep on talking to each other.
Although, I have a question. So let's say you given, let's say, translate stuff, right, for the game. Let's say menus or something.
I don't translate. I check if the translation is fine.
Okay, so if you double check, so that probably question comes through.
Okay, just to specify, sometimes there might be small cases where you actually have to translate something, but those are very minor. And if it happens, then it usually means that something changed in the English version, and in that case, I mean, you don't want to waste the time of the translators over and over again, because that's just going to delay stuff. But yeah, that's fringe cases.
Yeah, because in my case at Sony, I was kind of surprised how much power I could do. Like, if I want to change something on the PSN, I could, funny enough. So, but of course I would be in trouble, but as everyone would notice. But if I want to change something stupid, I would actually could do that, funny enough. I don't know why Sony allows me to do that, but
yeah, I guess with localization, it's not to that extent. I mean, obviously, you're only operating within your language version. You're not touching English, which is key, because obviously English is going to be the main version. But within your version, let's say if you have a completely brand new, ultra minor character, he's just for example, let's say in Plants vs. Zombies, it's just going to be some random NPC who just throws a couple of lines. Then if the translation is extremely dead, then maybe it depends on the situation. You might be allowed to tweak his name a little bit to make sense a bit more. But yeah, it's very case to case, and obviously it's not like you're going to reinvent the name of Dr. Zambas, because he's had that name for a while. You're not touching that stuff.
I just remembered about BF4 translation. You told me about the Polish translation for that game.
Yeah. Here's the thing. I don't blame the localization for that, because
just give me examples. I want to remember the examples.
In it was mostly audio, and one I remember was like, the soldiers had like those random shouts that they would do when you're near them. And one of them was like, "I am Godzilla and they're Japan," or something like that. And
Wait, you never heard of that, Dark?
No.
yeah, Polish is pretty interesting with that. And the thing is, for Battlefield 4, you could only, if you bought the game in Poland, you could also only play it in Polish or Russian. So it's not like you could switch to English like in other Battlefields.
I am Godzilla and they're Japan. It's just like
because that was region lock in BF4. I don't blame the localization for that, because first of all, it's one of those. I don't know. I have no idea, honestly.
I would love to know what was the original.
I mean, I'm sure it is somewhere, but the thing is, with audio, you kind of have your hands tied to some extent, because
you need to record. You need to record it.
Yeah, you need to record it, or you need to somehow change it, paste it together so it works. It's not like you just can walk up to the voice actor. And also keep in mind, many voice actors will be actually pretty known people in the bigger games. For example, I think in Battlefield 3, there was a very known Polish actor doing some voice acting. And it's not like you can just record it, send it for checking, and then you just return 3 weeks, month, or whenever later and say like, "Hey, bitch, listen up. This makes no sense. Re-record it, bastard." Because, I mean, it costs money. It costs time. It's not like those people have all time in the world either. So you kind of have to work with what you have, really.
Yeah, true.
In luck, it's more important if you check if the phrases are correct in Polish, although obviously there are cases where you can like allow a mistake, but if that like kind of makes sense with the game's, I would say, flavor, like you're not expecting, for example, I didn't do Battlefield, but for example, if you had a soldier who is currently under artillery barrage, you're not expecting him to speak textbook Polish. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I know what he means. Like, no one will be like, you're under fire, and it's like, let's say, British soldiers under fire, and the British person just goes, "All right, lads, anyone got some cup of tea or something like that?" Like the most formal thing you could ever say while you're under fire.
Yeah, exactly. What you really should focus on is whether it's functional Polish. Well, I'm speaking Polish, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And also if the audio is of the right quality, because I mean, with recording, sometimes something might be a bit jumbled. It happens. It can slip through. In that case, I mean, you'll have to report it unless you want to make the players go deaf or something. I mean, recording equipment sometimes might have limits for stuff like shouting and such. It happens. So sometimes, I mean, some recording might be necessary if you really have no way around it. Sure, you can suggest that, but yeah, it's your job to just check if actually, if that line is of good enough quality to land in the game.
And that, I mean, that's not only video games in this case. It comes with, I think, movies or anything. Anything in creative media anyway.
Yeah, obviously. And one thing worth keeping in mind in general is that the things you focus on, the main challenges, they're going to be very different depending on the game. For example, I was doing localization testing for 2 games. One of them was Plants vs. Zombies Battle for Neighborville, and the other one was Need for Speed Heat. And those games, even if you play in English, if you look at both of those games, they're just so completely different in terms of language style. You need to look at completely different things. For example, in PvZ has so many wordplays, and wordplays, they're always going to be difficult to translate. And the translator obviously is also working under some time limit. They will not always be able to convey it well. It's not their fault. And yeah, you're kind of like a second check. If you come up with something nice, then maybe you might be able to apply it.
You know what would be funny though? If by some really weird miracle and accident, someone puts the localization from Plants vs. Zombies into Need for Speed and Need for Speed into Plants vs. Zombies.
No, that's not happening.
Oh, that'd be hilarious though.
I know it would be hilarious. It would probably cost a lot of people a job, which is not so hilarious.
Yeah, not that.
But yeah, it's not happening. I can tell you that much.
Oh. Okay. Dark, you want to say something before we end? Anything that is on your mind. Anything, I don't care.
He fell asleep.
It's okay.
No, I think it's very interesting.
A lot of people don't.
Just one very important thing that I just remembered. With localization testing, for most of companies, keep in mind it's a bit of a foot in the door, but it's not going to be your forever job because localization is mostly seasonal. If you do not end up in, let's call it sustain, where you'll be doing localization for basically, let's call it live service / updating, perhaps also marketing, then it's kind of going project to project. So it's not something you're going to stay in permanently for the entire year most of the time. There might be cases where you do, but more often than not, no. But it's that foot in the door where you can at least say, okay, I did something in game dev, and that's going to make your job a bit easier when it comes to looking to next work. It's not going to be like a guarantee or anything, but at least you could, like, there is a difference in importance between volunteer stuff and like the actual job, because then at least you can say, I saw how the sausage is made. I have an idea about the realities of working that job. I have some skills with that.
Yeah, the most important thing is like you completed something different in university that has nothing to do with video games, but you can always put your volunteer work you did in video games or whatever you think is right with, like, you're proud of in what you did in video games. You can always apply for the position in video games, even if you don't have the qualifications. If you did something, that's already good enough.
Well, good enough. Sometimes will be, sometimes won't.
Oh
be.
Yeah.
You can definitely at least try to rely on that. Also, although on the other side, don't go overboard. Don't just write literally everything that you remember, because if the CVs are too long, then the person reading that might just think that you're basically doing it's just fluff, it's just filler. You're just trying to make yourself look better than you are, which obviously is not what you want.
All right, we've been talking for an hour and 15 minutes. Like I said, Dark, you still awake there?
I'm still here.
Good, fantastic. Want to talk how English localization works?
I have no idea.
You just speak English and bring some tea. That's it.
Yeah,
that's how it works. How English person communicate with each other? They drink tea.
We just drink tea and stare at each other.
Yeah, pretty much. Okay, I don't want to go there, but you just drink tea and look at the elections.
Oh, let's not.
Yeah, I'm just kidding. I'm not going there. Anyway, I think we're done for now because I don't think anyone wants to sit for another hour talking about something. So, you guys got anything else? Just closing thoughts? Anything that comes to your mind in a sentence or two?
Nope.
Honestly, I think I said most of the stuff I really wanted to say. But yeah, once again, if you want to apply for a game dev job, don't get discouraged if you get rejected once or twice or even 3 times, because just stay persistent. Really have some trust in yourself, because it's not something that you really often get done on the first try. Just keep on grinding.
Pretty much.
You gotta fake it till you make it in every industry.
Yeah, that's true, actually. That's pretty much true. Okay, then. I think we're done for today. So, alright, thank you, Szymon and Dark, for participating in this podcast, and Szymon explaining how localization works and what it takes to actually work in localization when it comes to video games. So thank you for being in this podcast and talking about that. And to our listeners that are still listening, thank you so much that you're listening and actually support the podcast. Leave your feedback, whether it be negative or positive feedback you find about this podcast. Please leave it a comment. I'll read everything because it's really important, because you're listening, so we want to improve. And that's kind of it. So thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you guys in the next one.
Your hands upon a dead man's gun, and you're looking down the sights. Your heart is worn and the seams are torn.